I feel like hookup culture allows for a lot of patriarchal disrespect.
Yep.
And I believe that hookup culture is another way to just allow for male domination upon the female body.
Yeah, that works.
Ready?
Mm-hmm.
Hold on. Where are we? All right, everybody. Welcome to the Safe Space Podcast. I'm your host, Sydney Rosant, and I am with
Aicha Sabara.
Welcome back. It's been a minute.
It has been a minute. It has. How have you been?
I'm decent. You know what I'm saying? I've been, just minding my business, drinking my water.
So real. Healing. Doing what you have to do.
I'm just,
I love that.
vibing. It's also like 1 a.m.
So real. Podcast hours for real.
These are the podcast hours. Anywho, how have you been?
I've been good. Just doing school.
Right.
Trying to get things done.
Last semester of undergrad for you.
Last semester of undergrad.
Exciting.
Isn't it?
Very crazy.
Nerve-wracking.
Very crazy. You about to be degreed up.
Degreed up and applying for the next.
I'm screaming. Isn't that how it goes?
It just never ends.
Ever.
One day we'll know
Ever.
peace. Just not today.
I'm not convinced.
Me personally, I'm not convinced either, but I have to keep saying it for us to keep going.
If you just keep saying it, then maybe it'll happen.
Yeah.
Or maybe it won't, and you just keep saying it forever.
But you know what stays? That optimism.
Right.
That's key.
Right. Right. But anywho, I know you have a specific topic that we're going to be talking about, but you have a little bit of familiarity with it because you are learning about it in your sociology class.
Yes, I'm taking a class called Sociology of Gender at the University of Georgia. It's a really, really interesting course that kind of delves into all facets of how gender plays into society.
Right.
From how we self-identify to how we see it in society. And it's really crazy and enlightening. Really love the course. And we've been talking about a lot of different things. And one of the things we've been talking about that I wanted to bring up on this podcast, because I feel like we can resonate with it as college students, was hookup culture.
Right.
And I guess the dynamic sexual scripts play into our everyday lives. So I guess it's a very broad topic, and there's so many ways we can go into it.
Right.
But I feel like me and you, we go to two very different schools. As you know, I go to an SEC school here in the South. I go to UGA, and you go to school up north. You go to an Ivy, But I feel like one thing remains kind of constant, which is hookup culture is prevalent.
Right.
And it exists in so many different facets. So I just wanted to talk about that today.
I guess my question is, where does this sort of idea or this relationship between women's empowerment and kind of embracing our sexuality, what is the relationship between that and hookup culture, which I would say is I feel like hookup culture is used as this is the application of sexual empowerment, right?
Yeah.
This is what it is supposed to look like. But then when you engage in it or you hear stories about it, oftentimes it's not satisfying, which doesn't feel empowering, at least to me. That doesn't feel like, what do you think the relationship actually is? What does it really indicate about where we are in terms of empowerment?
That's a really great question. So I think to really understand that, starting and going off, you have to really understand, I guess, what constitutes as hookup culture.
Right.
And being in this class, I think we all know that hookup culture has a sexual connotation to it, obviously, and sexual underlying. But we define it within our class as any type of sexual underlining. Because I know some people think of it as like you make it to that last base, like you are sleeping with somebody, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But actually a lot of studies in colleges are defining it as any type of interaction that can be constituted as sexual, from merely kissing somebody to all the way, like to the end.
It's actually interesting that you say this, because I feel like, I think it's interesting that is sort of the academic perspective, mm-hmm. or the academic frame of reference on what I guess a hookup would be. I also looked at it from like a racial perspective, because oftentimes when you talk to like white people, they'll be like, I hooked up with so-and-so, and then you're like, okay, that means that you slept with them, like you had intercourse with that person, and then like come to find out they're like, oh no, like we hugged.
It's funny because yes,
right, and I'm just like, wait, what? Like y'all cuddled? That is not hooking up. And then like when you like I at least from what I've experienced in mm-hmm. just talking to like Black people, when they say they hook up with somebody, when we say we hook up with somebody, we had sex with that person.
I think it's because, okay, and I think this plays into the question that you asked earlier, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. So I think the reason why we see that shift mm-hmm. between the races when we talk about hookup culture is because mm-hmm. one, hookup culture is not accessible to everybody. And we were talking about this in my class.
Okay, this is interesting.
It's more accessible for, especially in the area that we live in, mm-hmm. white people,
right?
Especially young white people, mm-hmm. to indulge in hookup culture because they do hold more societal power than minorities do.
Right.
And it might seem like a stretch when you think about it, but like, no, it's not. It's not as accessible. And when you look at it, a lot of white women, they're the Western societal beauty standard. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I feel like they can get away with doing less in hookup culture and still being a part of it. Because this is something we also talked about in my class. There's a lot of references to the class, but ambiguity within hookup culture. Mm-hmm. There's a reason why there's so much ambiguity and why studies are so broad, because they want to include every facet of what could be constituted as hookup culture.
I also think another part of this is access to humanity, right? Mm-hmm. Because Black people don't have access to humanity.
Very true.
And I think, and the way I kind of am looking at this, or the angle which I'm looking at this from, is there is this underlying negative sort of viewpoint that we have of just sex in general. Mm-hmm. And so because of it, and because of the stigma and whatnot, I think that's kind of like, for a Black person to have sex, it devalues you a lot. Whereas a white person can indulge as much as they want, and they don't get the scarlet letter.
110%. And I guess this goes back to, you were talking about women and empowerment in hookup culture. Mm-hmm. I think that plays so much into it, because I believe a lot of women, especially college age women, indulge in hookup culture as a means of like validation within the environment that they're in.
Agreed.
Hookup culture is so common, or it's so commonly spoken of, that I feel like we, as a community, and by we I'm talking about like our generation essentially, feel like you have to indulge in it or you're going to be frowned upon in society, right? And it's really weird. It's very counterintuitive, because as you said before, there is a negative connotation when we talk about things like sexual encounters in society. Mm-hmm. But that connotation is very, very, very much centered around women.
Right.
Right?
Agreed.
So like a man can go around, have as many sexual partners as they want. They're expected to have as many sexual partners as they want.
Right.
And it's almost like a clap on the back, right? They're just like, oh my God, great. A woman, however, is going to be extremely scrutinized for doing the exact same thing because she's a woman. Now break that down into race. Let's talk about Black women and white women, right? As I said before, hookup culture is not accessible to minorities.
It's not.
It's not, especially, for example, at the school I go to. predominantly white institution, that's not something that's always accessible to students of color. And you talked about earlier how you noticed how when you talk to certain white students, they'll talk about hookup culture as huddled because, but when you talk to a Black woman, for example, it's like, no, we went all the way.
Right.
And I think it's because of that lack of accessibility that we're seeing stuff like that. It's already hard when you're not, I guess, the societal, that level of societal desirability isn't there, right?
Right.
So there's a lack of access. And I feel like this is more of like a little theory of mine. But with that lack of accessibility comes almost a willingness to do more and a pressure to do more. Because, oh, I'm giving you a chance. I'm indulging in this hookup culture with you. This could come from any man of any race.
Right.
And a lot of women do things because they feel like they have to do them, not necessarily because they want to.
Right.
So I think that there's a lot of pressure on women of color to go further in hookup culture than there is for like white women.
Right. I think that's an interesting theory. I actually have the opposite thoughts. I believe that if Black women were not restricted and as scrutinized, we would probably engage a lot more. And the reason why is like, oftentimes when you speak to like Black men who primarily date outside of the race or primarily date white women to be specific, they usually cite the fact that white women will openly pursue them, right? And tell them like, hey, I want to have sex with you right now. That kind of thing. I don't believe Black women can get away with being that bold about what they desire and what they want. So I get what you're saying in terms of like when you do get to talk to somebody, right, that like there's that pressure there. But I feel like people don't really have a problem hooking up with Black girls. I think
there's definitely an attraction there.
I think the problem becomes actually courting Black women openly. I think that's what the real issue is. But I think that I think Black women are afraid to actually engage and indulge in sexual interactions with a lot of people. I think that Black women are a lot pickier because they have to protect their, what is the word? Of course I can't remember the word. But I think that they have to kind of consider how society will view them after the hookup, right? After I add, because, we could honestly have the conversation about like body count too, right? Yeah. After I add this body, right? What does that do to me in society? Whereas a white woman can have hundreds and it doesn't really matter, right? Because a lot of it has to do with, I think Black women are constantly thinking about how does this affect whether or not I will find a life partner, right? That's true. Because when we look at the numbers, if you're, I think it's like, I don't know if biracial women are included in this, but I'm pretty sure if you're like a monoracial Black woman, you look Black, it's like 28%. I think it's 20%. It's 20% likely that you'll get married, right? Yeah. So those numbers are not favorable. And so knowing that body count matters to a lot of guys, right? Yeah. And knowing that you don't get forgiven and knowing that you have this stigma of being hypersexual and all of these things and very promiscuous just because of this color of your skin, I think you actually have to be very picky, right, about who you actually engage with in that way. Or if you're not picky, you have to be sneaky.
Yeah. Okay. I see exactly what you're saying. I see exactly what you're saying. And I do agree with you. I do agree with what you're saying. And I see exactly what you're saying because I've seen it in society. Right. And I think that's a very fair statement. I didn't think about it like that, but yeah. Yeah. Sorry, that sounds like that was a profound moment.
I'm screaming.
No, because what I was talking about earlier was more, I guess, geared towards specifically sexual acts.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, like in the individual interaction, like that kind of thing.
Because I feel like there is that underlying attraction. We already know that there's an underlying attraction there's a hypersexualization of Black women. That's been going on for a while.
Right.
very long time. So it's not an issue of attraction. And we do see that issue amplify itself when we get past hookup culture and into, I guess, marriage culture and all that stuff. And I think it was very interesting. There was something that you said that I'm trying to like backtrack on because it like brought a question to my head. And it has to do with, I guess, it had to do with something you were talking about, Black women and marriage.
Of the 28%.
It had to do with that, yes, because I was gonna ask. Oh, the question's gone. The question's gone. And maybe it'll pop back up.
Oh,
it'll
Lord.
pop back.
It's because it's 1 a.m.
It's because it's 1 a.m. We're not at our greatest. But we're having a great conversation right now. This is very enlightening. And I guess I wanted to talk about trips where they're concerned with the hypersexualization of Black women and that commitment issue that we were just talking about.
Right.
So I do still want to kind of gear it back to hookup culture, but
I mean, I guess like sexual scripts is sort of a part of the culture.
Yes,
like,
for
you brought
sure.
up off camera, like I guess a good example would be like Netflix and chill and what that connotation means. Like if you invite somebody over to your place or they invite you over to their place, like, you know how everyone's like, oh, you know what's going down, like that kind of thing. So that's definitely, I think, a part of hookup culture.
That's true. But I didn't think about it as a sexual script prior to taking this class, actually. I thought it was really interesting because we sat and we broke down the steps to have a successful Netflix and chill encounter.
Right.
And it was kind of... It was amusing.
That's interesting to talk about in class.
Oh, it was so amusing, especially considering the whole lot of us don't know each other.
Right.
We're all just college students and we're just like, so Netflix and chill, how do y'all do it?
That is
and everybody's
what a bonding moment to have with your classmates.
Funny. And our teacher is so young. She's a grad student. She's a grad student as well.
I'm screaming.
Shout out to her. Love her. Oh my goodness. But it's so funny because like we're all just kind of sitting there looking at each other and nobody's like, I don't want y'all to know what what I got. They're all like, I don't know.
It's giving never have I ever.
No, truly. Oh my goodness. And it's so funny.
Like, put a finger down. Oop.
Nope.
Ooh, not you.
She was like, guys, close your eyes. I'm going to ask a question. I don't want to single anybody out. And I was like, so real. Because nobody's answering you for real right now.
Exactly.
But I didn't realize how scripted like hookup culture is. And we were talking about how like it's very ironic because our generation statistically is having less and less sex than the generations that came before us. And we've talked about this in prior podcast episodes.
We have.
Where I believe it's because our generation is very socially awkward. We don't know how to interact with one another. And that's a completely different issue.
Completely different.
But I didn't realize how scripted some of hookup culture actually is. And when you delve into it, it's like we are all doing the exact same thing, or like anybody indulging in hookup culture is doing the exact same thing because we broke it down into steps. And I kind of want to talk about why, or like our thoughts on why we do this and why we continue to normalize this, because I feel like in general, when we talk about hookup culture, we try to kind of play it downplay it as something that's, not a big deal, because I don't think it really truly is. But it also seems like there's a genuine disconnect with what people's personal beliefs on hookup culture is and the things that they're actually doing, especially kids in college. So like, I feel like a lot of people indulge in hookup culture, not necessarily because they want to, but because it's just what's going on. And obviously that plays into the way that we interact with one another. So like we were talking about Netflix and chill, for example. Like we were talking about all the little steps, and it was like, you have to like meet the person. Right. No. Like you have to like not necessarily meet, because we got dating apps and stuff like that, right?
Right.
You got to find a person to Netflix and chill with. Okay. Then small talk.
Right.
Very, very
Naturally.
bare minimum small talk.
Right. How was your day?
How was your day? But there's like
if you're lucky.
If you're lucky. If you are.
This is like a consensual sexual script.
Yes.
Okay. None of the scary stuff.
None of the scary stuff that I'm sure we've all experienced.
Right. None of the scary stuff.
This is a
successful
downplay it,
sexual script.
Exactly. If we're gonna downplay it as much as we possibly can,
right,
and make this as nice and nitty gritty as we possibly can.
Right.
There's times that you have to like think about, because there's so many dynamics into it that I didn't even think about until we were talking about this in class, and I was like, oh my God, this is like a script. This is like a script for a play.
Right.
And I don't think people realize that. And I'm like, where did we get all this? Because like you meet the person, small talk, but you don't just like talk to them for like a couple of minutes and then you're just like, oh my God, come over. No, you got to talk to them for like 2 or 3 days. Bare minimum. Hey, how are you? And then you got to go under the guise of like, oh, I genuinely want to meet you. We should.
You do want to meet them, but like,
you want to meet them.
There's a reason.
But there's a reason. There's an underlying sexual connotation.
You want to toot it and boot it. Anywho.
Exactly.
Right.
And so then we hit the, hey, like, what are you doing tonight? Like,
It's a 1 a.m. text.
A 1 a.m. text, like, hey, I'm not busy. Would you want to like come over? We've been talking. Never. We talked about that too. There's always a time. I said, me personally, I said directly after sunset,
gotta have boundaries,
because that's
guys.
when people are just kind of out and about.
You gotta have boundaries. We can schedule and plan things.
Yes,
it doesn't have
exactly.
to be
but notice that this first one, normally there's a lot of people who just, like,
but this is a successful one.
This is a successful one.
I'll let you go through the script. No,
yes.
We don't get off track.
This is a successful one. So we're not just hitting. I have like a picture of this. Like we like talked it out on the board. It's the funniest thing. Oh my goodness. And it was just so crazy because like we as a general whole were just like, yeah, this is what happens. Half of us I don't indulge in hookup culture.
But
But I know. And I was thinking about it.
Is? I don't know. I think this is relatively like simple, simpler than I think it might seem, but I think it's ritualistic.
Okay.
And so
would you elaborate on that? Yeah.
So I think just like in general, right? Like every generation has the various existential circumstances in which it exists, right? That generation exists. And so I'm going to assume that hookup culture is a part of each of these generations. Yeah. It's just the way that you communicate to get to this casual hookup is probably different.
For sure.
And so I think that because of, like dating apps, all these things have been introduced into our generation's way of dating, I think that's why it is the way that it is. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think it's a ritual. I think that different generations have had different rituals, but I'm sure that like, if people's grandparents would actually be honest about what they were doing way back when, there was probably a ritual. I'm sure people in the 80s when they were coked up and doing stuff together, go to some kind of club, do whatever drugs and then go back with each other. Yeah. Right. I'm sure the people in the 2000s, whatever they were doing. Yeah. Right. They probably had their own thing, that MySpace and slide into
MySpace you up text.
Right. DM you on MySpace. If they even had DM, I don't know how that
worked. They posted it on the general group board.
I don't know how they did it. And then you have Tinder. Yep. And so it's just like, this is just how people, I feel like, operate. And it's in a way like we're all trying to find each other, and especially at this age where you're trying to like explore and figure things out, there is sort of the ritual of, okay, if you want to get this done, this is how you do it. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's what it is, because like even when you just think about like people's lives and experiences, we kind of are all living the same life to a certain degree. You know what I'm saying? So like I think that this just is following that pattern.
That's fair. I think that's a really fair take on it. And I completely agree with you. I do believe that that's why we're seeing that. Plus, with the amplification of social media use in our current generation, everything's on social media. Our generation, although we can't talk to each other, are very out there and very adamant about, talking about what's going on, especially right now, especially the push for mental health after COVID. So I feel like we're talking about this a lot more. And actually, thankfully, we're scrutinizing a lot of hookup culture now.
Right.
Which is...
I think the issue is more so the ramifications of hookup culture rather than... And I think how big it's gotten, because though I don't necessarily think it's a positive thing that sex has as much stigma as it does in, I would say, like the Western world. Actually, I would say just the U.S. to be specific.
Yeah.
Because U.S. is very like conservative and evangelical, and that's why we have all these issues.
Yeah.
It be... I'm sorry, it be you Puritans that
Not
just...
the Puritans.
It
Yeah.
be you Puritans. You just mess everything up. Lord, just let people live. Gosh.
No,
I'm sorry, but
she had to let that one out.
I
It was sitting on
did.
her
Like,
chest
y'all
for a
just
little
be
too long.
blowing me.
So real, yeah.
Preachers. I just have to go on this tangent because it really kills me. Preachers will go up on their pulpit and talk about sex the entire time. They'll talk about gay people. They'll talk about just everything about sex while they're having sex with a child.
Yep. Let's talk about it as a society.
Let's talk about your
Let's
sex
talk about
life.
your life.
I went to a church where the pastor before the pastor, like when I went to the church, there was a specific pastor there, but the pastor prior had a child with a 16-year-old. So God. I'm just like...
But they're the staples of morality in our
right.
communities.
But they be the ones perpetuating. They be the ones perpetuating nonsense. Okay, I'm sorry. I went on this tangent.
It's
This
so
is
real.
This is all my fault.
This is all my fault.
Sorry,
it's so
guys.
crazy.
But yeah, so I feel like hookup culture allows for a lot of patriarchal disrespect.
Yep.
And I believe that hookup culture is another way to just allow for male domination upon the female body.
I'm so glad you said that.
And I got one more thing I gotta say. I'm gonna let you do your thing. But I think that when I think about America, and I think about the way America or just Americans address certain social issues, it's typically with half measures. And I think that when people talk about female empowerment or women's empowerment have, they talk about like the solution. And the first thing that comes up is hookup culture and wanting to like have more sex with men. I'm like, baby, that's not the solution because these men are crazy.
No.
Right? Because you're not actually addressing how those men operate. You're not actually addressing the misogyny that you are now exposing yourself to. Yep. And it's not like, I'm not blaming anybody, but I'm just saying like how we address like people who are disenfranchised and marginalized, it's usually half measures. Yep. And so when people look to hookup culture and they say this is the solution, I'm like, no, you haven't solved anything. You have to dismantle the entire system first before you can even think about hookup culture as a solution.
Exactly. And I'm not sure if there's an effective way as of right now to dismantle hookup culture, because...
Or you said, is hookup culture or the patriarchy?
The patriarchy is a completely different issue. That needs to be dismantled for a lot of reasons.
Okay, so to clarify, because we haven't really specifically said hookup culture good, hookup culture bad, hookup culture in the middle. Okay. So what do you say?
Hookup culture, I think hookup culture, that's a really tough question. Because
we've tiptoed around it. We have kind of, we're speaking about it from this like perspective. It's dangerous. It's not, there's the script, there's this,
the ramifications,
but we're not really saying, is hookup culture good? Is hookup culture bad? Obviously this is like a nuanced conversation, but like, what are your general feelings towards it?
I think it's kind of similar to what you had just been talking about, in the sense that I don't think hookup culture is bad. I don't think there's an issue with people wanting to, I guess, explore their sexuality, explore different facets of themselves, understand themselves. I think that there's a positive that can come from stuff like that, truly. And I think hookup culture could be a good thing, but there's a lot of negative ramifications of hookup culture, specifically towards women, that make the negative stigma of hookup culture. Because hookup culture, you hear hookup culture, there's not a positive connotation with hookup culture.
No,
there's not.
But is that because of the stigma associated with sex, or hookup culture in and of itself?
I think it's because of the inequality within hookup culture.
Right.
There's a huge power dynamic in hookup culture. And we were talking about this in my class, and it was actually so...
Can you describe, because I think one thing I've noticed when we talk about these things, we say there's a huge power dynamic within hookup culture. Can you, like, for the audience's sake, can you describe what that exact power dynamic is? And this is all I think we're primarily speaking about heterosexual
relationships right now.
Yeah. So can you explain like what that power dynamic is? Like, what does it look like?
I think from the gaze of a college student, at least, and the things that I've been talking about in my class, hookup culture was created to benefit men. Men hold a lot of power in society, and they hold a lot of sexual power.
Right.
Especially in hookup culture. So by that, I mean, I'm not saying that like, oh, you're a man, you're like power dominant, anything like that. I'm saying when you break down hooking up from a gendered sphere, a lot of women, like I was talking about the orgasm gap outside of like the podcast, but like a lot of women statistically have come back and been like, I'm more concerned about my partner's, I guess, pleasure. Yes. Perfect word for it. Pleasure during the sexual encounter than my own. And you know, you hear that from women,
right?
But the issue is on the men's sphere, they're more concerned about their pleasure than the woman's pleasure,
right?
In that sphere. It's garnered to benefit men. And I'm not saying that there's no benefit to women indulging in hookup culture,
right?
But it's geared to benefit men. It's because a lot of the women who report like, oh, I've indulged in hookup culture, a lot of it is seeking validation from these men,
right?
From this hookup, from their friends, even men. They could be attracted to a woman, want to sleep with them, and then their friend group, for example, is like,
right,
I don't know about that one. So he's still gonna go and sleep with her.
Of course,
he could have the time of his life, but he's gonna go back to his friends and be like, yeah, that was mid.
Right.
You know, they hold a lot of power. And I think when we talk about like that validation aspect, there's a lot of trying to compensate for that lack of equality there. And I just don't think it's feasible.
So when you talked about men holding a lot of power societally and whatnot, what do you think about the statement? And I believe it was Kevin Samuels who probably popularized it, but I'm sure this is just sort of, I don't know if you know what like the manosphere is, but
yeah,
I think this is one of their recurring talking points, that women are the gateway to, or the gate to sex for men, right? Because we just spoke about the power dynamic, right? And so what you're describing is in complete contrast to what they're describing. So what would you say to that? Someone tells you, I believe that women are the gate to sex. What do you say? And then I have a follow-up question after that as well.
What do I say to that? I think there can be a little bit of truth to that statement, but I think that's more so when we, not necessarily within hookup culture, but into relationship culture.
Okay.
Like women do, it's a weird dynamic because I know that this sounds very contradictory to what I was just saying.
Right. And
I do believe what I was just saying. But the issue is, this is all under the assumption of consensuality. And they're just like, oh, we're assuming that these men are coming up with the like,
being honest about their intentions.
Intentions and all that stuff. And I think that there are certain spheres where, you know, a woman holds the power to say yes or no within sex. And that's where a lot of that argument of like, oh, women shouldn't have so many bodies because like she holds the key to sex, men just do it.
Right.
But I would argue that that's more geared towards relationships. I think a lot of women, when you look at hookup culture, when a woman is going out to hook up with somebody or a man, likely they're not going for somebody that they want to be in a relationship with. There's a lot more leniency towards the people that you're looking for when you're talking about hookup culture. And I think it could really go both ways.
I mean, my personal belief is that like that the idea that like women are the gateway to sex is just false, because it makes it seem as if men are these animals who cannot control themselves. Like, I just have to stick my wiener into anything.
Yep.
Right?
Because they're genetically...
Open your legs for me, please. Like but that kind of thing.
That's how they're genetically predisposed.
Right.
Sydney.
They're animals. They're animals.
Yeah.
But like, I think, and this is my thing, they have just as much a say as the woman does, right? They have to give their consent as well. And so like, even when we like perpetuate this idea that like, oh, it's women who have like who have the gateway to sex or hold the keys to sex, whatever, you then take away like the man's humanity as well, right? And that's also the other problem with patriarchy, is that it completely extracts. If you could tell, I hate the patriarchy. She don't like the patriarchy. I hate the patriarchy bad. I hate the patriarchy real bad.
And as you should. There's a lot of flaws.
It do have a lot of flaws. I hate it real bad. Let's please.
Can't currently think of any pros.
Can we dismantle it, please? Because all it does is just extract humanity from everybody. Truly. Unless you're like an extremely wealthy, rich white man. But then we have to talk about capitalism and how that intersects with that. But I don't want to take us on a tangent because I need to go to sleep.
That's so real. Because I need to go to sleep.
So I'm not going to take us all the way there.
She said, I'm not going to talk about that because I need to peacefully sleep tonight.
Right.
But in the morning,
right,
she'll be right back.
And will. And then on top of that, I have a story from when I was in middle school. Okay. I was in 8th grade. And I went to a Catholic school. So like there was no dating. Yeah. There was no, it was like boys in this line, girls in this line. Yeah. Like you're not even really allowed to play with each other. Okay. Like that kind of thing. Right. So our like cross gender interactions, like it was relatively limited. Like I was friends with a lot of boys because I played basketball. Yeah. But outside of that, like, not really. So I did hear some things, right? And so we had this mechanics class and somebody started talking about how they watched comic book porn. Okay. Or no, anime porn. Oh. And I was like, anime porn? What? I was like, wait, first you watch porn?
We're like 12.
Right. I'm like, you're 13. And he was like, we all do, Sydney. I said, all of you guys? He said, yeah.
Who is we?
All the boys.
We French now?
Right. I said, okay. So I started asking all the guys one by one. I'm like, you watch porn? They were like, yeah.
Sydney was interrogating them.
No, I was. Like, literally the rest of the day. I was like, so you watch porn too? He was like, yeah. And then no, I could have sworn like this one kid was like, I really don't like seeing the guy in it sometimes. Like, I don't like that. Like telling me the preference of porn they like to watch. I was like, God. I was like, I thought that's what adults did. Yeah. I was like, I didn't know y'all was doing that. But now every time I think about like how much porn people consume, yeah, there are some people, usually I would say generally boys are a little bit more susceptible to this, but I'm sure there are some girls too who could be watching, you never know, yeah, who are raised by porn.
You're talking into like their sexual sphere of the world, like yes, okay,
like if you really start watching it, first of all, I'm talking to these people at 13 asking them if they watch porn, and they already have a preference.
They've been watching for a while.
Right. So who knows how long, when they got introduced, they could have easily gotten introduced to it in elementary school. You know what I'm saying? So it's just like, when you think about like how entrenched some people are in porn, and we know how unhealthy porn is, because it is. That's the one thing I would say for certain. Like, you can look at the studies, like that stuff messes you up.
It does have mental repercussions.
Like that is a red flag for me, at least. Like a huge red flag. If you have some type of porn addiction, I could never be with you.
Okay, fair.
Cause like something gonna be wrong with you.
Yeah. Plus, I don't like the idea. There's people have like porn addictions, and then they have preferences within what they're watching, and then that's what they're into. So then there's this underlying expectation that you have to live up to in regards to how, again, where that power dynamic comes into. You want, like, it's just too much.
It messes up the experience of what I feel like it's supposed to be. And so that's why I personally like would avoid it altogether. But going back to what I talked about was like people presenting hookup culture as the solution, right? Or as evidence of empowerment.
You have to learn to be alone, and it can be very, very hard, but you have to learn to be happy and seek validation within yourself and not others.
Is that a lot of y'all don't have passions. A lot of y'all don't have hobbies.
Let's start
I'm being
reading.
serious.
Let's start reading.
I'm being so serious. Like,
I would almost argue that hookup culture is becoming a hobby.
No, that is a hobby for a lot of them.
It's their passion.
Well, I don't know about passion.
I would argue it is.
Because a lot of them,
it's lacking passion, but it's their passion.
That's what I was gonna say. Passion where the passion is not there. Is the passion in the room with us? It is not.
She said, I can't see it, me personally.
But like, definitely like heavy on the please develop some hobbies, you guys. Yeah. There's so many things that you can be doing, so many things that you can be getting better at. Lord knows a lot of y'all have deficits in your life, so
deficits in your life, Sydney, please.
You've got lots of things that I'm sure that you can work on. So let's work on those. Get off of Tinder. Get off of TikTok. Watch us, though. That could be a hobby.
Watch us.
Right. Subscribe.
Truly. Subscribe.
That could be a hobby.
See? Do you see? And we have such riveting conversations. It really is a passion.
We have like 20-something episodes.
See?
Do you know how much time that is?
Dedication.
Right.
Ain't that crazy?
If a round is 15 episodes, you get like hundreds of rounds out of us. That sounds crazy.
That's going in the quote book.
Right. No, but my point is that like this is just so much better than that. Like,
I completely agree. Not to be like, watch us 24/7, but do.
Why not?
We have such riveting
Watch
opinions.
Us over and over and over again.
Actually, yeah, just keep watching the episode over and over again.
What I'm saying.
And just really absorb what we're saying.
That's what I'm saying.
And then once you've absorbed it, osmosis it, then reabsorb.
Exactly.
Like
over and over and over again.
Repetitively.
But yeah, no, seriously, I do feel like a lot of people just don't have an identity. A lot of people like don't really have passions or hobbies, and like everything is just finding another person. And I just know some people who I'm like, so this is it. Tinder, dating somebody or hooking up with somebody, and
until they get married.
Well,
if they get married.
I was watching Love is Blind. And no, because one of the guys said something. He said, how many times am I going to look for something better?
Ooh.
So this like monotonous routine of like constantly like trying to find a different hookup, trying to go on a different date, trying to like, at some point you need to actually get to know the person that you're talking to and see if it works or not. Otherwise, like, you're gonna keep doing this until
well, I mean, how many failed talking stages does one need to go to? Like, me personally, I told you I don't indulge in hookup culture, but that doesn't mean that I'm not into like in the dating world or like looking for something.
Hookup culture adjacent.
Hookup culture adjacent, truly. And they try to drag it into it. Oh my goodness, they try to drag it in so heavy. They're just like, oh my God, Yeah,
I mean,
I
that's
want to be together, but like we have to sleep together. Like that's a whole different issue.
Yeah, well, different episode.
Different episode. Don't indulge in hookup culture if you don't want to. Like truly,
Yeah, you don't have
like
to.
you don't have
Lame.
to. I couldn't have said it better myself. It's lame. Like, don't indulge in hookup culture if you don't want to. I know that there's this connotation that everybody needs to do it or you're missing out on something, yada, 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 blah,
Do whatever
blah,
you
blah.
want to do.
Do what you want to do. If you want to hook up with people, hook up with people. If you don't, don't. Me personally, hookup culture adjacent.
Right.
Like, how many, I don't understand how people do it. Because how many failed talkings, I can't do another failed talking. I got one more talking stage in me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just becoming celibate. Like this is just, we're just not no more nothing. I'm not talking to you.
Right.
I'm not into you. Don't exist. The male sphere is gone after that.
You've
like,
said this a lot of times.
I'm tired, Sydney. I'm so sick. I've said it a lot of times. Reevaluated, changed my standards here and there, determined what I wanted. There's a lot of process that comes into it, but getting to know so many people is tiring. How many times am I going to ask you what your favorite color is? I don't care what your favorite color is.
We can sort of, I don't know how long you want to stay here for, but we can do a part 2.
We should.
We can definitely do a part 2.
Yeah.
But and I guess we have a couple of minutes to decide if you want to do a part 2. Mm-hmm. But that's the problem. You have too many people that you're talking to.
Well, yeah.
What you do is you have to become the Bachelorette. If you can tell, I watch a lot of reality TV shows, typically dating shows.
She's the expert.
I am. But pretty much you start off with like this large pool of people. Or they don't have a large pool. They start with 30 people, right?
Yeah.
And then they whittle it down.
I feel like that's relatively large for one person.
It is.
Yeah.
So how many matches do you have? Right. How are you supposed to whittle that down?
Okay, but here's my issue, right? Mm-hmm. I know a lot of people who don't have a problem with going on a date with another person every other day because they're getting to know new people and
That's
all
too
that
much.
stuff. I can't do that. I feel like you match with a lot of people, but you don't talk to everybody you match with.
What is like the exact vibe? You don't have to tell me, but you I think you just have to consider it. What is the exact vibe, look, and feeling that you want to have or want to experience, and you don't accept anything but that when you're swiping?
When I'm swiping,
so like when you're looking, I know you're one of those open, everybody's beautiful, but I'm sure intrinsically there is a specific look and vibe and feeling that you want to get or you want to experience. So if you see somebody and you're like, maybe that is a left, because you don't want to have 1,000. Because let's be serious. It gets to that point sometimes. You don't want to have 1,000 maybes, 1,000 they're okays. It needs to be what you like for surely. Because think about it this way. If you're like very, very attracted to a person, you're more than likely going to have a good time with them if you hang out with them, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So you want to make sure that at least... I mean, it's probably going to be a lot of people regardless, right? Yeah. But that the pool of a lot of people is a lot of people that you like to look at.
That's fair.